I never imagined that purchasing my dream property would lead to the most infuriating legal battle of my life. What started as a simple case of trespassing turned into an all-out war against an entitled homeowners association and their power-hungry president who believed my private land belonged to the community. But before I dive into this wild tale, let me set the stage properly. The beginning of the nightmare. My purchase was supposed to be perfect. Acres of beautiful countryside with no restrictions, no homeowners association breathing down my neck, and complete freedom to enjoy my investment. That dream lasted exactly 3 weeks. One Tuesday morning, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. A line of vehicles stretched across my front pasture. Initially, I assumed it was some kind of mistake. Perhaps visitors to the nearby subdivision had gotten confused about parking arrangements. Then, I spotted the marker. A bright orange post displaying Meadowbrook Community Overflow Parking was driven deep into my soil, surrounded by SUVs, pickup trucks, and even a small RV parked as if this were a designated lot at the local shopping center. I stood there for several minutes, trying to comprehend the audacity. This wasn't just near my property line. The sign was planted dead center in my field with vehicles scattered around it like confetti. Taking a calming breath, I marched over and ripped the post from the ground. Then I approached the nearest vehicle and tapped on the window. The driver, a woman in her 50s radiating the unmistakable aura of suburban entitlement, slowly lowered her designer sunglasses before cracking the window. "Yes?" she asked, her tone suggesting I was interrupting something important. I gestured broadly at the surrounding landscape. "This happens to be my private property." She blinked in confusion. "Oh no, this is designated community overflow parking." My jaw tightened. "Actually," I replied, keeping my voice level, "this is my land." The woman's frown deepened, genuine irritation crossing her features. "Well, I was informed that residents could utilize this area when the main clubhouse parking fills up." I forced what I hoped resembled a polite smile. "Informed by whom?" She gave a dismissive shrug. "The homeowners association, obviously." Now, I wasn't just irritated, I was furious. The full scope of the invasion. I began a thorough inspection of my property to understand the complete extent of this violation. What I discovered was far worse than unauthorized parking. People had been treating my land like a public thoroughfare. There was a clearly defined path where countless vehicles had carved tracks through my fields. Joggers were utilizing my private trails as if they were public walkways. Then I witnessed something that sent my anger into overdrive. An entire family had set up camp on my property. They'd arranged folding chairs, unpacked a complete picnic spread, and brought a cooler, treating my land like their personal recreation area. I approached them, struggling to maintain my composure. "Excuse me," I called out, "you do understand you're on private property?" A man sporting a Meadowbrook Community polo shirt glanced up from his sandwich with mild annoyance. "Oh," he responded, as if I'd just mentioned something trivial. I crossed my arms firmly. "This isn't public land." He released an exasperated sigh. "Well, technically, this property has been utilized by our community for many years." I squinted at him. "Utilized?" "Exactly," he continued with that patronizing smile I was beginning to recognize. "The neighborhood has always had access to this recreational area. It's an established community amenity. Community amenity. They'd been using my property for so long that they genuinely believed they owned it. That's when I noticed another sign, a laminated map attached to a wooden stake. It was a neighborhood directory that the HOA distributed to new residents, and there, clearly labeled as Community Recreation Zone, was my property. I yanked the map from its post and held it up. "This," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "is not part of your association." The man barely seemed concerned. "Well, you should really discuss that with the board." "Oh, I absolutely planned to. Because these people hadn't just claimed my land, they'd created official maps, installed signage, and convinced homeowners it was community property. The HOA had never even attempted to ask permission. That was about to change dramatically. Confronting the queen bee, I didn't waste a single moment. The instant I saw my property labeled as community recreation space on an official-looking HOA map, I knew exactly where to go. Straight to Margaret, the association president. I skipped the phone call entirely. I wanted to witness her expression when I slammed that fraudulent map onto her desk. The HOA headquarters occupied the community clubhouse, an unnecessarily elaborate building that seemed designed to drain the joy from any social gathering. I strode inside, past several bored-looking board members, and headed directly to the reception area. The secretary barely acknowledged my presence. "I need to speak with Margaret," I announced. She sighed while chomping her gum lazily before pointing toward a glass-enclosed office. There she sat, Margaret, Empress of the Homeowners Association, positioned behind an absurdly massive mahogany desk. The walls surrounding her displayed framed photographs of herself at countless HOA functions, ribbon cuttings, charity events, some ridiculous Volunteer of the Decade plaque. She'd constructed a monument to her own importance, and she was about to receive a harsh dose of reality. I entered without announcing myself and dropped the HOA map and parking sign onto her desk with a satisfying thud. Margaret barely reacted. She folded her hands professionally and offered me a practiced, tight-lipped smile. "Ah," she said, as though she'd been anticipating this exact conversation. "To what do I owe this visit?" I gestured toward the map. "Care to explain why my private property appears as community recreation zone?" Margaret gave it the briefest glance before responding with manufactured politeness. She released a gentle sigh and shook her head. "Oh my, there's really no reason to become agitated. This is simply a misunderstanding." I folded my arms. "A misunderstanding?" She nodded, tilting her head with fake sympathy. "You see, Meadowbrook community has always utilized that land for leisure activities. It's been an unofficial community space for quite some time. The homeowners naturally assumed—" I interrupted her. "Assumed?" My voice sharpened. "Margaret, let me clarify something. That is my property. It doesn't belong to the HOA. It never has. Your assumptions are legally meaningless." Margaret's smile remained frozen. "Well," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet, "technically, that could be disputed." My jaw clenched. "Disputed?" She reached into her desk and retrieved a thick binder, flipping through color-coded sections before settling on a particular page. "Yes," she said smoothly. "There's a legal concept called adverse possession. It applies when property has been openly used by the community for an extended period. Since the HOA has maintained and accessed that land for years, the board has grounds to pursue a formal claim." I stared at her. She'd prepared legal terminology and technicalities, hoping I'd either be intimidated or confused. Unfortunately for her, I wasn't ignorant. I leaned forward, placing my palms on her desk. "Margaret," I said, keeping my voice low and controlled, just enough to make her shift uncomfortably. "Adverse possession requires continuous, exclusive use and a formal legal process spanning years. Even successful claims don't automatically transfer ownership." Her smile wavered. I wasn't supposed to understand that. She quickly recovered, turning to another section in her binder. "Well," she continued as if she hadn't just been exposed, "I can appreciate your frustration, but the reality is that our community has an established pattern of using that property. It seems only reasonable that everyone should continue to enjoy these benefits." Reasonable. She actually used the word reasonable. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "Reasonable," I repeated, shaking my head. "Would have been requesting permission before installing signs and claiming my land and promotional materials. Reasonable would have been avoiding trespassing and fraud." Margaret sighed as if I were being difficult. "Look," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This doesn't need to become contentious. If you're willing to negotiate, I'm confident the board would consider discussing compensation for shared community access." Compensation. She was seriously proposing that I lease my own property to an HOA I didn't belong to. I laughed. A cold, humorless sound that made Margaret's smile falter once again. "Oh, Margaret," I said, shaking my head. "You truly don't comprehend the situation, do you?" She straightened defensively. "There's no need to be unreasonable," she said, dropping her fake pleasantness. "I'm not being unreasonable," I replied, standing up. "I'm ending this charade." I turned to leave, but she played her final card. "You should be aware," she said, her voice cool and calculated, "that the board has already authorized an evaluation of your property for community use. If you refuse to cooperate, we may have no alternative but to pursue legal remedies." I turned back to face her, and there it was, the barely concealed threat. I gave her a slow, amused smile. "Go ahead," I said, stepping closer. "Pursue all the legal action you want. And when you do, I'll ensure the court examines this fraudulent map, these fake parking signs, and every single document your HOA has created claiming my property." Her expression hardened. The mask was finally slipping. "You wouldn't want to make this complicated for yourself," she said, attempting one final intimidation. I took a slow breath, then leaned in slightly. "Margaret," I said, my voice calm and measured, "I don't think you understand what complicated actually means, but you're about to learn." And with that, I walked out, because Margaret wasn't going to stop. She wasn't just entitled, she was dangerous, and I had a feeling she was about to make an even more serious error. The escalation begins. Margaret didn't handle confrontation well. She'd spent years getting her way, intimidating homeowners, manipulating regulations, and wielding fake authority. Now she'd encountered someone who wouldn't surrender, and she couldn't manipulate or gaslight me. So she did what all tyrannical HOA dictators do when cornered. She escalated aggressively. The first warning came via certified mail, a thick, official-looking envelope bearing the Meadowbrook Community HOA Legal Division seal, which, incidentally, wasn't a legitimate legal department. I opened it and immediately burst into laughter, because Margaret was doubling down on her delusion. Final notice. You are in violation of Meadowbrook Community HOA access compliance regulations. Failure to comply will result in legal proceedings including but not limited to financial penalties, property liens, or forced assessment. Property liens. Margaret was threatening to place a lien on my private HOA-free property. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. I flipped to the next page, an itemized list of penalties. $750 for unauthorized restriction. Of community access, $1,000 for noncompliance. With HOA landscaping standards, $500 for interference with community. Operations, $1,500 for interfering with a community. I'd never joined. I tossed the documents onto my kitchen counter and shook my head. Margaret wasn't just trying to intimidate me anymore. She was constructing a case. A completely fabricated and fraudulent case, but a case nonetheless. If I'd been anyone else, if I'd been someone unfamiliar with property law, I might have actually been concerned. But Margaret was about to discover exactly how severely she'd miscalculated. I ignored the letter completely, didn't call, didn't respond. And that silence drove her absolutely insane. 2 days later, she dispatched her enforcers. I stepped outside one morning to find 5 HOA board members positioned at the edge of my driveway. They weren't on my property yet, but they were lurking, waiting, observing. I leaned casually against my pickup truck, sipping my coffee. "Good morning," I said, keeping my tone friendly. "Something I can assist you with?" The leader, some guy wearing khakis and a visor, cleared his throat importantly. "We're here representing Meadowbrook Community to address the ongoing violations regarding community accessibility." I sighed internally. "Let me stop you there," I said, raising my hand. "I'm not a member of your HOA. You have no jurisdiction over my property. We're finished here." Margaret's lieutenant, a woman clutching a clipboard with obvious self-importance, stepped forward. "That's where you're incorrect," she said, smiling like she was explaining arithmetic to a child. "The HOA has long-standing rights to this property. The board has voted unanimously to evaluate your land for shared community use." I raised an eyebrow. "Evaluate my property?" She nodded confidently. "Yes. Since you've clearly indicated unwillingness to cooperate, we're proceeding with an easement assessment." An easement assessment. They were attempting to steal my land through legal technicalities. I smiled. Not a friendly expression, but a cold, knowing one. "Best of luck with that," I said, turning toward my truck. Margaret's second-in-command wasn't finished. "If you continue to refuse compliance," she said, her voice sharpening, "we'll have no choice but to pursue additional legal action." I turned back. "You mean more fraudulent legal notices? More phony penalties?" I shook my head. "You people must be incredibly bored." She flushed red. "This is an official warning." "Let me give you a warning," I said, stepping forward just enough that she instinctively backed away. "If I see any of you step foot on my property again, I will file trespassing charges. No warnings, no second chances. You have no claim here whatsoever." The board members exchanged nervous glances because that wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Margaret hadn't anticipated resistance. She thought she could bully me, wear me down and frighten me into submission. She had no idea she was starting a fight she couldn't possibly win. Because 2 days later, Margaret escalated once more. And this time, she made her most catastrophic mistake yet. The criminal fraud Margaret had already attempted every bullying tactic in her arsenal. Fabricated fines, manufactured violations, even sending board members to intimidate me on my own property. When none of that succeeded, she committed an act so brazenly illegal that I had to read the evidence twice to believe it. She sold access to my land. I wasn't just dealing with an entitled HOA anymore. I was dealing with outright fraud. It began with a voicemail from a realtor named Steve. His tone enthusiastic and professional. "Hi there. Just following up on your inquiry about purchasing a premium lot in Meadowbrook community. Let me know if you'd like to schedule a viewing of our available properties." Confused, I returned his call immediately. "Hey," I said, "I think there's been some mistake. You left a message about property in Meadowbrook community." "Oh, absolutely." Steve sounded delighted. "Are you interested in acquiring a premium lot? We still have several available with exclusive community amenities." I rubbed my forehead. "I already own land here, and last I checked, my property isn't for sale." Steve paused uncertainly. "You do?" "Yes." I took a deep breath. "And my land definitely isn't on the market." Steve released a nervous laugh. "Well, sir, I'm not sure what you mean." The HOA listed multiple lots as part of their expanded amenity package, all with guaranteed homeowner access. I sat up straight. "Guaranteed access?" My jaw clenched. "Steve, where exactly is this expanded amenity package located?" Steve hesitated. Let me verify." I heard papers shuffling, then the moment he read my address aloud, my stomach plummeted. It was my property. The HOA had been marketing my land as part of their exclusive community amenities. I opened my laptop and began investigating. And what I discovered made my blood boil. The HOA's official website featured a new section for prospective buyers, and prominently displayed, "Meadowbrook Community proudly offers exclusive private hiking trails, community event spaces, and premium recreational areas available to all residents." Adjacent to that text was a map, highlighting my property in official HOA colors. Clicked through additional pages and found an HOA welcome packet for new buyers. They'd rebranded my property as the Meadowbrook Private Recreation Area. They'd sold memberships for access. They'd even included photographs of my fields in their promotional materials. I wasn't just dealing with trespassers or entitlement anymore. I was dealing with systematic fraud. Margaret hadn't just lied to me. She'd profited from my land. She'd convinced dozens of new homeowners that they had access to my property as part of their HOA membership fees. And I had documented proof to destroy everything. But before I could contact an attorney, Margaret made her most devastating mistake yet. The next day, I walked outside to find workers on my land, and they weren't just passing through. They were landscaping it. One worker operated a riding mower cutting my grass. Another was installing a wooden signpost. The sign read, "Welcome to Meadowbrook Private Recreation Area, HOA members only." I was done. This wasn't just abuse of power anymore. This was criminal activity, and Margaret was about to lose everything. Building the fortress Margaret had pushed beyond all reasonable limits. She hadn't just trespassed or harassed me with fraudulent legal threats. She'd illegally marketed access to my land, convinced new homeowners it was an HOA amenity, and even sent workers onto my property to landscape it as if it already belonged to her. I had overwhelming evidence to destroy her legally, but first, I wanted to ensure she could never set foot on my land again. So I did what any rational property owner would do. I constructed a fortress, not a decorative picket fence, not a simple chain-link barrier, a wall. I contacted a contractor I trusted and ordered commercial-grade security fencing, complete with reinforced steel posts, anti-climb mesh panels, and motion-activated surveillance cameras. But I didn't just secure my property. I eliminated every shortcut the HOA had been exploiting. I surveyed every single access point they'd been using, the dirt trails they'd created, the improvised parking areas they'd claimed, even the gaps in my tree line where they'd been cutting through. I sealed them all. Every path, every entrance, every loophole they'd been abusing, gone. I even redesigned my entrance gate, ensuring that the only access to my land was through my private driveway. By the time construction was complete, the HOA was trapped like rats. No more cutting across my property, no more picnic areas, no more Meadowbrook private recreation area. The day after completion, I stood on my porch with my coffee and waited. Sure enough, Margaret appeared. She came storming up to the fence, flanked by 2 board members, arms waving. Face crimson with rage, I didn't speak. I simply let her have her tantrum. "What is this?" she shrieked, shaking the fence. "You cannot do this." I took another leisurely sip of coffee. "This," I gestured to the towering steel barrier, "is my private property, and you're trespassing." Margaret went absolutely ballistic. "You are obstructing community access. You are violating homeowners' rights to—" I interrupted her. "This land was never yours," I said, my voice calm and steady, "and now it never will be." She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't finished. I reached into my jacket and produced a thick legal folder. Inside, a cease and desist order filed against the HOA for illegal trespassing, fraudulent real estate claims, and unauthorized commercial use of private property. I opened it to the signature page where my attorney had already applied his official stamp. "By the way," I added casually, "you're being sued." Margaret froze. Her face went ashen. The board members behind her shifted uncomfortably, because suddenly this wasn't just a property dispute. This was a lawsuit. And when I filed that lawsuit, the investigation began. And that's when Margaret's entire world truly collapsed. The empire falls. Margaret had spent years controlling the neighborhood, bullying homeowners and acting as though she were untouchable. But the moment my lawsuit was filed, her entire empire crumbled. The investigation uncovered massive fraud. Margaret had embezzled thousands from HOA funds. She'd forged signatures on fabricated property agreements. She'd lied to homeowners about land ownership, selling access to property she didn't control. The worst part? She'd documented everything. Once homeowners realized they'd been scammed, they turned on her immediately. Additional lawsuits followed. The HOA board collapsed under pressure. Within weeks, the entire HOA was dissolved. And Margaret? She didn't just lose her position, she lost everything. The court ordered her to pay complete restitution for her fraud. She faced criminal charges. When the judge finally ruled, she didn't receive a fine or probation. She received prison time. The same Margaret who'd spent her life threatening people with legal action for violating HOA rules was now behind bars. The HOA. Gone forever. No more fines, no more fabricated rules, no more entitled Margaret. I walked out of that courtroom a free man. No HOA, no harassment, just peace and quiet. Every time I pass Margaret's former house, now empty, her name erased from every HOA record, I can't help but smile, because in the end, justice prevailed.